The river was not supposed to take anyone that day. It glittered under the bright afternoon sun like a sheet of broken glass, calm in places, violent in others, whispering at the edges of the old wooden bridge as if it had no secrets at all. But then I heard the scream. One sharp, terrified cry that sliced through the peaceful daylight and made every bird rise from the trees at once. By the time I turned, a woman in a pale yellow dress was already being dragged under the current, one hand reaching toward the sky like she was begging heaven to hold on to her for just one more second. If you believe kindness can change a life, if you believe second chances arrive in the strangest ways, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Sometimes one small act of courage becomes the beginning of a story no one could ever forget. My name is Arman Vale, and before that day, I was the kind of man people passed without remembering. I lived alone in a small blue house at the edge of Briarford, a quiet riverside town where everyone knew your sorrow even when they pretended not to. 3 years earlier, I had lost my wife, Mireia, to a sudden illness that moved faster than my prayers. Since then, I had learned how to wake up, work, eat, and sleep without really living. I repaired boats for fishermen, fixed broken dock planks, and spent most afternoons avoiding conversations because pity has a sound, and I had grown tired of hearing it in people's voices. That afternoon, I had been carrying a box of rusted tools back from the marina when the scream came. For one breath, I froze. Not because I did not care, but because fear has a way of putting chains around even good men. The river below the bridge was swollen from rain, full of hidden rocks and twisting currents. People were shouting from the bank, pointing, panicking, but nobody moved. The woman vanished once, surfaced again farther downstream, her dark hair pasted across her face. I dropped the toolbox. The sound of metal hitting the bridge felt distant, unreal. Then I ran. I do not remember climbing over the railing. I only remember the cold shock of the river stealing the air from my lungs. The current struck me hard, spinning me sideways, slamming my shoulder against a submerged branch. For a moment, I could not see her. I could only hear the roar of water and the pounding of my own heart. Then her hand appeared again, pale and trembling above the waves. I fought toward it, kicking with everything I had, swallowing muddy water, feeling the river claw at my boots. When I reached her, she was barely conscious, her eyes open but empty with terror. I wrapped one arm around her chest and told her she would not die, though I was not sure either of us would make it. The swim back was not heroic like people imagine. It was ugly, desperate, breathless. Twice the current pulled us under. Once her body went limp in my arms and something inside me broke because it felt too much like holding Mireia in those final hours, feeling someone slipping away while I begged the world to be merciful. I screamed against the water. I kicked until my legs burned. A fisherman named Tobin threw a rope from the lower bank, and by some miracle, I caught it. Hands dragged us through the reeds and onto the mud, where the woman lay still beneath the blazing sun. Someone cried that she was gone. I pushed them away and pressed my hands to her chest. Again and again, I begged her to breathe. Her lips were blue. Her dress clung to her like a burial cloth. I pressed harder, counting under my breath, not to 10 or 20, but to every regret I had ever carried. Then suddenly she coughed. Water spilled from her mouth. Her body curled toward life, and the crowd gasped as if the river itself had released a soul it had stolen. Her name, I learned later from the paramedics, was Syra Niven. She was 32, a school art teacher from the neighboring town of Velmere. She had come to Briarford to visit the old bridge because her mother used to bring her there when she was little. A loose board, a sudden slip, one unlucky moment, and her life had nearly ended in daylight while strangers watched. I wanted to stay until she opened her eyes, but the medics pushed me back. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. People called me brave. I did not feel brave. I felt tired, cold, and haunted. For the next week, everyone in town spoke about it. They called me the river hero, though I hated the name. A local paper printed a blurry photo of me sitting on the bank with mud on my face. Customers came to the shop just to shake my hand. Old women brought pies to my porch. Children pointed at me from bicycles. But at night, when the house grew quiet, I heard the river again. I saw Cyrus' hand disappearing beneath the current. I saw Mireya's face in the hospital bed. Saving one woman had opened a door inside me I had spent years trying to keep shut. Then, 9 days after the rescue, someone knocked on my door. It was late afternoon, the kind of golden day when sunlight fills the windows and makes dust look like tiny stars. I opened the door expecting Tobin or Mrs. Halleck from next door. Instead, Syra Niven stood on my porch. But not like someone coming to say thank you. She stood barefoot, shivering though the day was warm, wearing a gray coat far too heavy for June. Her hair was damp from rain that had not fallen. Her eyes looked as if she had not slept since the river. In her arms, she held a small wooden box tied with a faded red ribbon. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I recognized her face from the hospital update in the paper, but she looked different in person, more fragile and more alive at the same time. She tried to smile, but it trembled and disappeared. Then she said she was sorry for coming without warning. Her voice broke on the last word. I stepped aside and let her in. My house had not welcomed a stranger in years. The air smelled of cedar, old coffee, and the lavender soap Mireya used to buy, though I had stopped buying it and still somehow imagined it there. Syra sat at my kitchen table and placed the wooden box between us as though it were heavier than stone. I made tea because that is what people do when they do not know how to hold another person's pain. She wrapped both hands around the cup but did not drink. She told me she remembered sinking. She remembered light above the water, people shouting, and then my face. Not clearly, not like a picture, but like a shape in a storm. She said when she woke in the hospital, her father was beside her crying, and the nurses told her a man from Briarford had jumped from the bridge. She had asked my name every day until someone gave it to her. But gratitude was not the only reason she came. Her hands moved to the red ribbon. She untied it slowly. Inside the box were letters, old photographs, a silver locket, and a folded drawing of the river bridge made in colored pencil by a child. She looked at me with tears gathering in her eyes and said that for years, she had believed her mother died in an accident near that bridge. Her mother, Nayila, had disappeared when Syra was 7. Everyone said she had fallen into the river during a storm, though no body was ever found. Syra had grown up with grief shaped like a question. The day she fell, she had been standing on the bridge because she had finally found the courage to bring her mother's old letters back to the place where her story ended. Then she opened the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and, beside it, a picture of a man I knew too well. My father, Callum Vale. The room seemed to tilt. My father had died when I was 19, leaving behind debts, silence, and a reputation no one fully explained. He had been charming in public, cold at home, and full of secrets that made my mother cry behind closed doors. I stared at the locket until the edges blurred. Syra watched me, afraid of what I might say. Her mother's letters mentioned Callum. Not as a friend. Not as a passing name. As the man she had loved before vanishing. The man she feared. The man she wrote might be responsible if anything happened to her. I wanted to deny it. Every loyal son wants to rescue the dead from accusation. But as I read the first letter, my hands began to shake. Nayila had written about meeting Callum in Briarford, about promises he made, about money he borrowed, about threats whispered when she asked him to tell the truth. She wrote that she had hidden something important, something that proved he had ruined more lives than hers. She wrote that if she disappeared, someone should look not in the river, but in the blue house near the marina. My house. The house my father left me. Syra did not accuse me. That almost made it worse. She simply sat there with the eyes of a woman who had nearly drowned in the same waters that had swallowed her childhood. She said she came because when I saved her, she felt she owed me honesty, even if it hurt. She did not want revenge. She wanted to know whether her mother had died afraid and alone. She wanted to know if the story she had been told was a lie. That night, we searched the house. At first, it felt impossible that anything could be hidden there after all those years. I had repaired floors, painted walls, replaced cabinets. But old houses keep secrets in the places grief does not think to touch. In the pantry, behind a warped shelf my mother had always told me not to move, we found a narrow panel with rusted nails. My hands worked slowly, my heart beat louder than the hammer. Behind it was a cloth pouch, stiff with age. Inside were bank papers, a woman's passport, a small tape recorder, and a final letter addressed to the child who deserves the truth. Syra covered her mouth when she saw her mother's handwriting. I could not move. The letter explained everything in careful, trembling words. Nayila had not fallen by accident. She had discovered that Callum was using false names to steal from widows and laborers, promising investments that never existed. She had planned to expose him. He threatened her, and when she tried to leave town with evidence, he chased her to the bridge. She survived the fall, injured but alive, and hid for 2 days in an abandoned boathouse before fleeing under a new name to protect Syra. She wrote that returning would put her daughter in danger, but leaving had destroyed her. The final line said she hoped one day Syra would understand that love sometimes looks like abandonment when fear is holding the knife. There was no death certificate. No proof that Nayila had died. Only proof that she had disappeared on purpose. Syra wept without sound. I sat across from her, crushed beneath the weight of a father I suddenly understood even less. Shame burned through me, though his sins were not mine. Still, his hands had built the walls around us. His lies had lived in my home. His violence had shaped Syra's life. I told her I was sorry, over and over, until the words felt too small to carry what they needed to carry. In the days that followed, something changed between us. Not quickly, not like romance in a song, but like dawn slowly entering a room. We took the evidence to the police. Most of Callum's crimes were too old to punish, and the dead cannot be dragged into court, but the records helped reopen questions long buried in Briarford. More importantly, the passport led to a name. Nayila had lived for years in a coastal town under the name Leora Senator. She had worked as a seamstress, kept to herself, and died only 2 winters earlier. Syra traveled there and found her mother's grave beneath a wind-bent cypress tree. I went with her because she asked me to, and because some roads should not be walked alone. At the grave, Syra placed the child's drawing of the bridge against the stone. She did not curse her mother. She did not forgive her all at once either. She simply knelt in the grass and cried like a daughter who had spent 25 years waiting for arms that never came. I stood a few steps away, feeling the sea wind move through my coat, understanding that grief does not disappear when truth arrives. Sometimes truth only gives grief a name. After that, Syra began visiting Briarford on Saturdays. At first, she came for the investigation, for documents and signatures and old witnesses. Then she came for tea. Then she came because the river no longer belonged only to fear. She brought sketchbooks and sat by the bank drawing children, fishermen, and sunlight on the water. I fixed boats nearby and pretended not to notice how the town became brighter when she laughed. She never pushed me to speak of Mireia, but somehow I did. I told her about my wife's singing, her terrible pancakes, her habit of leaving notes inside books. Syra listened as if every memory mattered. One afternoon, she handed me a drawing. It showed the bridge, the river, and 2 figures on the bank, not drowning, not running, just standing side by side beneath a wide sky. At the bottom, she had written, "Some people do not pull us from the water only once." I kept that drawing on my mantle. Months passed. The town stopped calling me a hero, which was a relief. Syra started an art program for children who had lost parents. She said grief needed somewhere to go besides silence. I helped build shelves, carry tables, and repair the leaky roof of the old community hall. The first day the children arrived, one little boy painted the river purple because, he said, blue was too sad. Syra laughed so hard she cried. I watched her wipe her cheeks and realized the sound did not hurt my heart the way happiness used to. It warmed it. But healing is never a straight road. There were days Syra could not cross the bridge. There were nights I woke from dreams of water and could not breathe. Sometimes shame over my father's actions returned like a storm, and I would pull away from everyone. Syra never chased me. She simply left a cup of tea on my porch, or a note that said, "You are not the worst thing your bloodline has done." Slowly, I began to believe her. On the anniversary of the rescue, Briarford held a small gathering by the river. Not a celebration of danger, but a celebration of survival. Lanterns floated near the bank. Children from the art program hung drawings along the bridge rail. Syra stood beside me in a pale yellow scarf, the same color as the dress she had worn the day the river tried to take her. She looked at the water for a long time, then slipped her hand into mine. It was not dramatic. No music swelled. No crowd cheered. But for me, it felt like the first breath after years underwater. She thanked the town. She thanked the people who had pulled the rope, called the ambulance, brought meals, asked questions, and stayed. Then she turned toward me, her eyes shining, and said that some doors open because tragedy knocks, but what we do after opening them decides whether pain becomes a prison or a path. I could not speak. I only held her hand tighter. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Your support helps stories of kindness, healing, and second chances reach more people. Special request, comment, kindness can save a life, if you believe one brave act can change someone's entire future. That night, after everyone left, Syra and I stayed by the river until the lanterns became tiny golden stars drifting into the dark. She told me she used to think being saved meant not dying. Now she believed it meant being given the chance to live differently. I thought of Mireya, of my mother, of Nayila, of all the love and pain that had flowed through that house, that bridge, that river. I thought of the moment I jumped, not knowing who Syra was, not knowing that saving her would uncover a buried truth, break open my grief, and bring light back to my doorstep wearing a gray coat and carrying a wooden box. I saved a drowning woman that day, but she saved me from a life where my heart had stopped making room for tomorrow. And sometimes, when the afternoon sun hits the river just right, I still hear that first scream in my memory. But it no longer ends in fear. It ends with a hand reaching back, with two wounded people standing on the shore, and with the quiet truth that even after the darkest current, life can still carry us home.